Welcome aboard. I'm Captain Wayne Canning and I'll be your host for this Ocean Navigator video. Today's video we're going to look at the second part of maintaining your steering system. In the first part of maintaining your steering system, we looked at the upper helm, the pedestal, the chain and sprocket, and the wheel bearings and other components in there that need maintenance. Now that we've got that done, it's time to look at the parts below deck. This will include the cable, the sheaves, any attachment points for the sheaves, the entire cable run. We'll also take a look at the quadrant, the upper rudder bearings, as well as the rudder stuffing box. These are all important components to check out carefully. So we want to make sure that we go through the system thoroughly to make sure that everything remains dependable. First part of this project, of course, is going to be gaining access, and that's always the most difficult part on most sailboats. So we're going to have to take the equipment out of the lockers and open up any access panels in order to get at everything. This may be a bit of a project, but it's going to be worth the effort. Before we get started, let's take a look at the basic tools and supplies we're going to need to be able to perform this maintenance. As in part 1, maintaining the binnacle and upper end of your steering system, you're really not going to need any fancy tools. Just your basic hand tools, screwdriver, wrenches, pliers, that kind of thing. Really shouldn't need any special tools. When it comes to supplies, we're really primarily just going to be using 30 weight motor oil, and having a good applicator will help with that. You may need some Bow Shield T9 as well, and in some cases the upper bearings for the rudder may need some special lubricant. Some you can use super lube on, others you may need to use wheel bearing grease. It all depends on the type of bearing, so check with the bearing manufacturer before lubricating any bearings. We're also going to need some rags, and of course some good work lights, because let's face it, we are crawling into the deep dark parts of your boat, so you're going to want to be able to see clearly once you get down there.
First thing you're going to have to do is empty out the lockers in order to get to the access panels. Once the lockers are emptied out, then it's time to open up any access panels. It's best to get as much stuff out of your way as possible.
Okay, now that we've got everything apart, it's time to just get in there and visually inspect everything. You want to look the system over carefully and look for any signs of abnormalities. Just keep an eye out for anything that just doesn't look right. Okay. We want to just look at the system and observe and see what everything looks like. We can see we've got the autopilot ram on here, and we've got the autopilot rudder angle indicator over here, and down here is the steering quadrant. What we want to do is move the wheel back and forth just while watching things and seeing what we've got. Basic observation.
As you or a friend rotate the wheel back and forth, you want to carefully observe all the moving parts. Try to get in underneath as best you can and look at all of the moving parts as the wheel is rotated back and forth. Check all of the pulleys and sheaves and make sure that they're spinning freely. Try to watch the cable as it moves back and forth and check for any damage to the cable. Make sure no stowed gear, hoses, or wires are contacting any of the moving parts. Carefully look underneath any fittings or moving parts for dirt or metal filings that may have collected underneath them. This could be a sign of wear indicating these parts need service attention. Use a paper towel or soft rag to check the steering cable itself for any broken strands of wire, or as they're more commonly called, fish hooks. Never use your hand or fingers for this, otherwise you'll find out why they're called fish hooks.
As we begin our inspection, the first thing I can notice is we have some excess wire here. I see this fairly commonly on a lot of installations. We want to go ahead and cut off this excess wire. The problem is if this were to get free, it could hang up on something, or worst case scenario, it could drop down on the other side of the quadrant and it could derail the live or moving wire. So we want to just go ahead and get this out of here. There's really no reason to have this on there. So we're going to go ahead and cut that off. The next thing after that, and while we're in this area, is we want to go ahead and check the bearing. We want to wiggle the top of the bearing and verify that there's no extra play in there, and we just want to check the general condition of the bearing.
Different boat manufacturers use different types of bearings. Other types of bearings can be simple bronze sleeves or high-density plastic sleeve. Many older boats will use an off-the-shelf pillow block bearing such as seen on this boat. Many newer boats will use a composite needle bearing type or other form of UHMW plastic bearing. Regardless of the type of bearing, you want to make sure that there is no excessive play. Check with the boat manufacturer or the bearing manufacturer to find out what type of maintenance you should do.
Never use grease or oil on plastic bearings. Most manufacturers recommend that plastic bearings just be flushed with fresh water while turning the wheel back and forth.
I can note a little bit of rust around the bearing, but it doesn't look too bad. This is just a steel casing, and they tend to rust a little bit. But what I will do is clean that up with a little bit with a wire brush, and we'll use some of the T9 to coat that. While I'm in here, we've also got a little Zerk fitting for greasing. So I'm going to take the grease gun and I'll put a little bit of fresh grease in there. You want to do that at least once a year. Two reasons. One, grease tends to dry out a little bit.
And the second reason is when you push new grease into the bearing, you push out the old grease, taking dirt and contaminants with it.
There we go. And I'll just pump some new grease into that. That takes care of that. And I'm just using standard wheel bearing grease on this. This is a standard off-the-shelf pillow block type bearing. I have a metal beam going across here that supports this upper bearing. I want to make sure that that's good and tight and in good condition.
While checking the upper bearing, it's also a good idea to check the upper bearing support. On many boats, this is a shelf that runs the thwart ships in the boat that is attached to either stringers or some other major support system. Often these shelves are either bolted in or glassed in. It's a good idea to check any bolts that are used to bolt it in. If the shelf is glassed in, you want to carefully inspect the tabbing for any cracks. Some bearings are bolted to the underside of the deck structure. In this case, you just want to make sure that all the bolts are good.
We just want to put a wrench on each of the bolts and tighten them up a little bit by hand and make sure that they're not too loose. If we do find any that are loose, we'll snug them down good and tight. We want to check the bolts on any rudder bearings and supports. We want to check them on the sheaves, and we also want to make sure that we check the bolts on the quadrant itself to make sure that everything's good and tight. Be sure to check any mounting brackets and base plates as well. Pay particular attention to any plates underneath the pedestal, because often pedestals will leak salt water. Many older boats use steel plates for mounting both idler pulleys and other pulleys throughout the system. So you want to check over all of your metal plates very carefully. Also, carefully check any wood blocks glassed in. A lot of these wood blocks were plywood, and sometimes water will leak into them and the plywood will rot out, weakening the structure.
Next comes the fun part of checking all the way underneath the deck. Access can be difficult, but you need to do it. We need to carefully check all the sheaves under there. We need to check the steering cable, and we also want to check the quadrant as well as the rudder stuffing box.
One of the first things we want to check is how the cable is attached to the quadrant. And this setup on this boat is fairly common, with an eye bolt going through an ear on the quadrant, and then you adjust the eye bolt to take up the tension on the cable over here. You want to check and make sure that the bolt is nice and straight, that there's no bends in it or any other damage to the bolt. You want to check that the eye is welded closed. This is very important, because if that's not welded closed, heavy load on the steering may cause that to open up and then the cable could come loose. Also, we can see on this one we've got an extra nut in here that should not be there. We want this eye bolt to be free inside of the hole here so that it can articulate and move around, and there are no side loads or stresses placed on it. I see this commonly in a lot of surveys where the extra nut has been put on. So when we service this one, we're going to go ahead and take that nut off. We also want to make sure that the lock nut is just an ordinary nut. You don't want to use a nylon insert type lock nut. The reason you don't want to use that is turning that up and down the length of the bolt causes the nut heat up. When the nut heats up, it can start to gall on the stainless steel, and then it'll jam and it'll be impossible to do any adjusting. If you have one on there now, just spray a little WD-40 on there and slowly back it off. Feel it every now and then to make sure it's not getting too hot. If it does get hot, let it cool off before you take it the rest of the way off. Here we got the stuffing box, and we can see there's really no real signs of water leakage there. So we come down, we'll check the hose, and we can see these hose clamps show a little bit of sign of rusting. So I think we're going to go ahead and replace those at the next haul out. I also think this hose is getting a bit old and dry rotted looking. You can see it's kind of cracking down at the bottom. So I think this hose needs to be replaced at the next haul out as well. Another important thing to check are the rudder stops. You want to make sure that the rudder doesn't over travel, because this could cause damage to the steering system or possibly the rudder in the boat. So it's very important that the rudder stops function correctly. They also take a lot of wear and abuse because there's a lot of loads put on them, so you want to check them very carefully. On welded rudder stops like you see on this boat, it's just a tab here. You want to make sure that the weld is in good condition and there's no rust or cracking going on there. Different types of boats will have different types of rudder stops. So what you have on your particular boat may be different than this one. Some rudder stops are a simple post in the center of the quadrant that stop over travel. Other rudder stops can be a cable attached to the quadrant to prevent over travel. Whatever type of stop you have, make sure that it functions correctly and that it's in good condition.
Next, we want to inspect the sheaves or pulleys for any excessive wear or damage.
We want to wiggle that side to side and see how much play is in there. Also can see that we've got too much slack in this cable. We also want to carefully inspect the idler pulleys. Just like the other pulleys, we want to check for excessive play in the bearings. We also want to check it over carefully for corrosion. These pulleys are at the base of the binnacle, and often binnacles can leak salt water that'll run down right onto the pulleys. So you got to check for corrosion fairly carefully. You also want to check the mounts at the top and make sure that the entire assembly is securely mounted. As with the other pulleys, you want to make sure that they're well lubricated and turn freely. As mentioned before, some older systems used a steel plate to mount the pulleys on. Often these steel plates are badly rusted. If this is the case, you'll need to replace the entire assembly.
While checking out the sheaves, it's a good time to go ahead and take a quick look at the cable alignment. You can check the alignment with a straight edge, such as this aluminum angle, or you can use a dowel set inside the cheeks of the sheaves. You don't want any misalignment on the cable because it will cause wear on the sides of the sheaves as well as wear on the cable. If you do find misalignment, you'll have to adjust the mounting of the sheaves. It's a good idea to disassemble the sheaves and clevis pins every few years for inspection and lubrication. If you have an older system, you may want to check and make sure none of your pins are brass. Older systems often use brass pins, but you really should have stainless in there for durability. It's best to go ahead and loosen the steering cable before starting. Once you have everything apart, go ahead and clean the pin and inspect it carefully for wear or damage. Next, we want to inspect the sheave itself. Just carefully look it over for any damage or any cracks in the cast. And make sure there isn't excessive play with the pin. Use a Q-tip with a little bit of oil on it to clean the inside of the oilite bearing in the sheave. Just wipe the oil around inside of it to remove any dirt or loose particles. Next, lubricate the pin with a little bit of 30 weight oil before reassembling everything.
That's right.
With everything inspected, cleaned up, and lubricated, it's time to put it back together.
There we go.
If your system is equipped with a conduit for part of the cable run, you want to inspect that very carefully as well. Check for any damage on the exterior of the conduit and carefully check the end fittings for any cracks or damage. You will also want to lubricate the cable going through the conduit with Teflon grease. Conduits should be replaced every 10 years or so because wear on the inside of them can cause the steering cable to jam up. So if your conduit has not been replaced recently, now might be a good time to think about doing that.
And finally, we want to adjust the cable tension and lubricate the cable a little bit. This helps because as you turn the wheel back and forth, the individual strands of the cable will rub against each other. So a little bit of lubricant in there will help reduce friction there. It's important to get your cable tension adjusted right. You don't want a lot of play in the system, but you don't want it too tight either. In theory, the cable should be just tight enough that if you hold the quadrant still and try to move the wheel back and forth, there won't be any play in the system.
Most chain and cable steering systems utilize either a threaded eye bolt or a threaded end swaged onto the cable for adjustment. There'll be two of these, one for each end of the cable. One of these will be attached to either side of the quadrant. Before we adjust the cable tension, we want to go ahead and get rid of the extra nut that prevents the eye bolt from articulating. The first thing we'll do is go ahead and remove the lock nut and the adjusting nut in order to get the eye bolt free. Now we can go ahead and remove the unneeded nut.
And while we've got this all apart and we're removing the extra nut, we might as well go ahead and cut off the excess wire. And we want to make sure that other wire is not under there. We will make short work of it. All right. While we're in here, we also want to check the cable clamps, the clamps that hold the cable together. We want to make sure that the cable clamps are in good condition, they're not rusted, and that they're securely on the cable. On this one, we can see that the cable clamps have been put on opposite. We really want the cable clamps with the U-loop on the bitter end of the cable, or the free end of the cable here. So what we're going to, this clamp is correct, so what we're going to do is go ahead and change this clamp around real quickly, so that both clamps are on with the U-clamp on the free end of the cable. So we'll simply take this clamp apart and we'll switch this around. And you want to adjust the tension on these nuts evenly from side to side so that you're not pulling too much tension just down on one side. And you want to make sure that you get them good and snug. Alright, now we're ready to put it back together.
With the extra wire removed and the extra nut removed from the eye bolt, we can now go ahead and start putting it back together and adjusting our cable tension. We'll start by doing a rough adjustment, just getting the cable snugged up. You want to get the nut about midway in the eye bolt. Before going too far on the adjustment on this side, we'll turn the wheel to the other side so that we can begin adjusting that eye bolt as well. This will help keep our wheel centered up. With our rough adjusting done, we'll turn the wheel back and forth. This will help even out the slack in the cable. Now we can make our final adjustments. Remember, take a couple of turns on one side, then go back to the other side and take a couple of turns. You want the cable just tight enough so that there's no slack in there, but not too tight to put any undue pressure on the system. With the cable tension properly adjusted, it's now time to put on the lock nut to make sure things don't come loose. Make sure the lock nut is good and tight. Finally, we want to put a little bit of 30 weight motor oil on the cable. Just a few drops on the cable is all you need. It helps to have somebody rotate the wheel back and forth as you do this. And as you can see, I'm using a small applicator to make sure the oil gets right on the cable. Be sure to wipe off any excess oil from the cable. And finally, we want to be sure to put any panels and covers back in place to protect the steering gear from any stowed equipment. This is important because any loose gear or equipment can easily get into the steering gear and cause it to jam or cause the cable to derail. This can result in the loss of steering at the worst possible times. So make sure your steering gear is properly covered and protected.
That completes this Ocean Navigator video series on maintaining your chain and cable steering systems. Now, not all systems are going to be exactly like this, but hopefully you've learned enough from this that you'll be able to maintain your own system. This is particularly important to do at least on an annual basis and definitely before you attempt any offshore passages. Knowing that your steering system is in good working order and that you won't have any problems with it will give you peace of mind on that late night watch. Should you need any parts or supplies for your systems, be sure to contact Edson Marine. Their friendly parts department will help you find almost any part you may need for your system, and they'll be glad to ship it out to you in a timely manner. Be sure to check out Ocean Navigator magazine at your newsstand and Ocean Navigator magazine online. Until next time, I'm Captain Wayne Canning, wishing you fair winds and following seas.